Hey everyone, and welcome back. If you've been following along, today is day 12 of Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. And we are going through our Bible in 365 days, and we are doing a chronological reading plan. So it's called the 1 Year Chronological Bible, which you can find the reading plan online at 1 Year Chronological Bible online, or you can purchase the 1 Year Chronological Bible. I have no affiliation with this company. I just like the plan. I like the format. I like the way it moves along historically through the book. That's what it means to go chronologically. And I think it fills in a lot of the cracks in the story. So we have a better understanding of how things happened, maybe a little bit why they happened. So we have more of a historical context instead of without, I shouldn't say instead of, but without having to dig into the history or read our study Bible ahead of time and see who wrote the story. This actually helps us connect a lot of the pieces together. So, welcome. If you have never seen any of these videos, if today is your first day, I'd love for you to go back because I started day one. And the point really of doing this is to be reading your Bible. I am really passionate about people having control of their own faith because I believe that God fills in the blanks for us. He wants us to understand it. I believe we are born in such a time where we almost all have the ability to read, and most people in the United States will have their own Bible, even if you don't believe. And I'm pretty sure I grew up in a house where I grew up in a house that was essentially atheist, and we had a Bible in the house. I didn't know about it until I was older, but we always had a Bible in the house. And so even in houses where one might not have a lot of people who believe or consider themselves faithful people, there's probably a pretty good chance that there's a Bible in your house. So dust it open and get to start reading. Go back. If you're starting today, if today is June 25th and today is your first day, go back to day one in your reading plan and start from the beginning and move on from there. And I really feel like you'll be inspired and you'll be happy that you started from the beginning and went all the way through to the end. I think that you'll find that it is just really rich and real, obviously amazing information because it's God, and we get to learn the story of who Jesus is and why we put our faith in him. But also, I think that it is just great for you to have, even if you're not a believer. This is amazing for believers, but it is also really significant for those who don't say they believe. Why? I find people all the time on Facebook or YouTube or TikTok or whatever quoting things in the Bible that they really don't understand historically what any of the meaning is. And so a lot of this will bring that to life. So you'll see a picture of real people and what they did. So I have digressed enough. I'm going to move to, because this is actually a big section. Today is our day 12. And in our day 12 in our reading plan, we are doing Genesis 23. Nope. We are doing Genesis 32 to 35. So it's a really big chunk, excuse me, of information. And just I like to discuss a little bit of where we came from, so you know what we've been to before. This is Jacob is our main character at this point. So Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. So God made his promise with Abraham, and then Abraham had Isaac, who was the first son of the promise, and then Isaac had Esau and Jacob has become the son of the promise. So the son that has a covenant currently with God. He moved to he had I want to use the expression, he had beef with his brother Esau through his own making. Really, he stole a blessing and he took a birthright from him. And then when his mother Rebecca saw that Esau was going to kill Jacob ran and went to find a wife in the homeland of Rebecca. So once he was in that homeland, he wound up finding two wives and not just one, and also two essentially concubines, and had 11 children up to this point. And then now they are coming back to his homeland. And so we kind of pick up from there. And so we're picking up in Genesis 32, and it's about 20 years later. So there's a big chunk of time that has happened. And obviously at this point, Jacob is significantly older. Maybe we can put him in his 40s-ish. I don't know if we're 100% sure about his age, but he's definitely more of a grown man. He has a family of his own. He has wealth of his own, and he's moving all of that back down to his homeland. He's currently up sort of in like the Mesopotamia area. So he's way above Israel, and he's working his way back down into Israel. And his brother Esau sort of lives underneath where he came from. He lives in a town called Edom, which is named after himself because he creates this nation. And so Jacob is coming down back to his homeland. So what we see in verse 1, what I see in verse 1, is that the angels of God met him. So right away in verse 1, it says Jacob also went on his way, because Jacob and Laban parted ways, his father-in-law. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God," and then named that place. And so already into this chapter, we're seeing that the angels of God are still with Jacob, and they met him on the way. And so there's just like probably a confirmation and a comfort from Jacob, knowing that he was answering God, because God did tell him to go back to his homeland, even when God had promised him before that he would go back to his homeland. And so at this point, God had spoken to him and said to go back. And then he sees that angels have met him on his way. And so even an understanding of knowing that they were angels, I think even that is, he's in such a relationship with God that he knew they were angels. Did they look different? Did they behave different? Or did he just, in his spirit, in his connection with God, just understand that they were angels? Either way, we're not 100% sure. They don't give us those details, but what we do know is that they were angels and that they were with him on the way. And then moving on to verse 4. Verse 4 says, he instructed them. So as Jacob finds out that Esau is coming up from his land to meet Jacob. And so Jacob says, "This is what you will say to my brother, to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I've been staying with Laban and have remained there till now, cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats. And now I'm sending this message to my lord that I may find favor in your eyes." So I don't know if you guys remember, but Esau is technically the older brother. They're twins, but Esau was born first. He's technically the older brother. And I can appreciate that at this point, Jacob has grown to such a position where he's actually showing him, Jacob is being humble. He's showing a little bit of humility here, and he's calling him my Lord. So he is showing him respect and honor, and he is letting him know that he's coming back with all of these things, these camels and donkeys. So verse 9, he says a prayer. Jacob prays, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper." This is where he says in verse 10, "I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said," so he's reminding God, "you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." And so I appreciate that he's coming to God in a really humble way, because he's scared. He's worried that Esau is going to make good on his promise, and he's going to come and he's going to kill Jacob. And I think that's a right and understanding fear. So I can appreciate that he was afraid. And the first thing that we see him do, which I think is better than what he did before he ran, which was essentially never went to God, we see he's immediately going to this God who, again, we're reminded, has offered him protection, has told him that descendants will be through him and will continue the covenant with God. And so he has gone to that God, and he's reminded that God that he is unworthy of anything that God gives him. And yet he still asks, "Can you please save me and protect me from my brother Esau?" And so he's making his prayer known to God that he is unable to do any of this on his own. And the truth is not only is he unable, but he doesn't deserve it. And so I just think it's a great picture of what Jacob is becoming. And I also recognize that in my own nature, I really have a hard time with this. I have a hard time recognizing uh, how much I need God in everything that I do, and how much I don't deserve God. That the truth of the matter is I break God's promises all the time, not just in the past, because that's an easy one. I can go back and say I did all these things that were wrong for a really long period of time, but I still continue to break all the promises, the things that He asks me to do, and the things that I know are good for me, and the things that I know He puts in place to protect me and the people that I love. And so I I like the reminder that Jacob gives, that he reaches out to God and discusses with God, because God knows. It's not that God doesn't know what Jacob has done or what's in Jacob's heart, or that Jacob is unworthy, but Jacob out loud reveals to God that he also recognizes that he is unworthy of all the things that God has given him. So in verse 20, it says, so he winds up coming down to meet Esau. Um, Esau's going to meet you and ask all of these things. And then in verse 20, he says, and I just wanted to point this out because of the word. He says, and be sure to say, this is, he's telling his servants to say this to Esau, because he has already split up his people and he's going in two different groups. And one of them has a ton of things. It has donkeys and camels and goats and sheep and, all of these things he's wants to offer to Esau. Verse 20, he says, and be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he thought, so he says one thing out loud, and now he's thinking in his head, he thought, I will pacify him. Now, this is the NIV, so I want to be sure that this is the NIV version. And he says, for he thought, I want to pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. And so I'm not sure how we always use the term pacify. I feel like sometimes it's a pacifier is for a baby, right? Like, this is ways to like calm people down or to relax them, to kind of get them to do what we want them to do. And in here, what he's trying to do is, if again I go back to that blue letter, it's kafar, and it says to make atonement. So there's a recognition there that Jacob has not done what he should have done with Esau. And so he wants to make atonement by giving him all of these gifts. Moving down to, so then we leave, now he's preparing, right? So he's preparing, he's sent out his teams and he's preparing to meet his brother. And he leaves his two wives, I shouldn't say leave, he stays. And then his two wives go off. So everyone is leaving and he's left alone. And it doesn't say he's asleep. It doesn't say anything like this. But what happens is a man comes up and starts wrestling him. I struggle with this passage. A man comes up, because I have a hard time understanding completely the point. And one of the things that I do know is, as much as I want to come to the text with a clean slate, I don't necessarily think it's possible. And so I'm saying this because I am a woman who has not had to protect my family from certain things. I am not one who has had a huge rift or separation with my family because of some of the violence that I have done. I am not one who is, I'm not a male, I'm a female. And so while I can understand some of these things, I don't necessarily have a first person perspective of them. So they're a little bit confusing to me. And I tell you this because he's going to wrestle with a man, which we will eventually find out is somebody else, but he's going to wrestle with a man. And I don't understand necessarily why he wrestles with this man. So I'm telling you this because he's going to wrestle with him. And then what happens is as he's wrestling with him, and maybe it's because he's stressing and struggling so much with what he had done versus what he needs to do. So maybe that's where this wrestling idea comes in. Maybe it's a physical manifestation of him internally wrestling with the things that he has to do. But he wrestles this man, and the truth is he's winning. And this is another thing I don't tend to fully understand. So he's winning, and as he's kind of got a hold on this man, the man touches his hip, because he knows that Jacob is, I'm going to be very literal. When the man saw that he could not overpower him. So this man, whoever this man was unable to overpower Jacob. Jacob overpowered this man. And so the man touched his hip socket, and immediately his hip was wrenched. So it was pulled out of socket, it was lame, whatever it was. He hurt Jacob in such a way that he was, not that he wasn't able to continue to wrestle, but we see in the future that he'll continue to have a limp. And so he touches his hip was wrenched, and then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob doesn't let him go and says, "I'm not letting you go till you give me a blessing." So he's still in a position where he's holding on to the man. And so he refuses to let go until he gets a blessing from this man. Is that strength in Jacob? Is that doggedness? Is it determination? Is it some kind of scrappy? I'm not 100% sure. And I have had such disdain for Jacob over my life as a believer that it's hard for me to see a valuable perspective in this. I'm certain there is one, but my view of him is already a little bit skewed. So trying to pull back, I am thinking that this this shows us a manifestation of what it means to wrestle with some of the things that we are struggling with God, some of the things that we maybe some of the things that we should be following that we don't want to follow, maybe some of the things that we're not 100% sure about our belief, like it seems that it was this, but then how do I answer that, right? And I think he gives us this freedom to wrestle with him and to ask a blessing of him, that when we believe and when we struggle and we wrestle with him, that we are able to ask for a blessing from him. So uh, so the man does give him a blessing, and the man says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." So I think we make this assumption that this man is God, or he is some form or manifestation of God. He's certainly not Jesus, because, well, I shouldn't say he's certainly. I'm sure some people think that he is. I don't think he is Jesus, because Jesus was born, and so there was a different manifestation of Jesus at that time. This man wasn't born, he sort of just showed up. And so it's some form of God that he's wrestling with. And the man says he's overcome. And then he says he has overcome this with humans. And so he has changed his name, which we will see through time and time again. We'll see through the scriptures that his name is changed, and that therefore there was a people that came from that. So moving on to Genesis 33. Didn't have as much struggle with 33, but that wrestling thing was definitely an issue for me. Okay, so if we go right to verse 1, this here is where Jacob goes down to meet Esau. So he looked up, there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and his two female servants. So he divided the 4 women up, and their children walked with them. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph in the rear, because she has only had Joseph at this point. So I'm going to say they're in order of importance. The most important person is safest in the back, and then the next most important person, and then the people that he can sort of leave less safe. And once again, we see this position of Leah and Rachel, where Leah gets shafted by Jacob. So Leah is the older sister, and Leah is the first wife, but Rachel gets extra special priority. So Rachel and Joseph. Now, Leah also has many children. Rachel has Joseph, and Rachel is essentially the most protected, and Leah is not. And then, of course, the servants above there, they've been put in front, or closer to the front. Now, I'm going to say they're probably all more protected by a lot of his other people that are in front. But if we talk about order of importance, Leah, unfortunately, did not make the grade, and Rachel got that position of most. Rachel and Joseph. So I shouldn't just say Rachel, because she is with her son. So Rachel and Joseph got that position of most importance. Verse 3, once again, he himself went on ahead, which is Jacob. He went to be in the front and bowed down to the ground. This is what I thought was fascinating. 7 times. So we have already seen 7 times. Now I'm just going to go over 3 times we saw 7 times. We saw 7 times in 7 days. So 7 days was how God made the world in 7 days. And then we see that he bowed 7 times. And we also saw that I believe it was Abraham gave 7 ewes, so baby lambs, unblemished, to Abimelech. And so we're already seeing this repeating number in important things. So, important context, we have the number 7. And I read that it is a number of completion, but without going into that kind of commentary, what I can see is there is some kind of importance to that number. And we see it showing up time and time again. There's some kind of relevance to that number. What that means as a fact, I don't think that we know, but I definitely think it's something worth looking at. And maybe if it is a completion, because the world was complete, so I can see where that would be gotten from. The world was made complete in 7 days, right? So it finished in 6. Seventh day was that holy day. So here we go. We have this complete 7, which is a complete week for us. And so then giving that 7 lambs, what he said, this well is mine, right? So this is a complete covenant. They've made a covenant. And then he comes and he bows 7 times. And so maybe this is the end. This is sort of where he makes his full atonement to his brother, and they've sort of ended their rift, and then they move on from here. So always saying, not 100% quoting me, this just is what I read and what makes sense to me at the time. It's sort of this rhythm that seems to be showing itself up in scripture. Because in verse 10, one of the things that Esau says, so he's giving all of these, you guys remember a little bit earlier, he was giving all of these animals and all of these treasures, all these things to Esau. And Esau comes and he says, I have enough. You don't need to give me anything. I have enough. I have enough of my own. I've made a family of my own. And yet Jacob says in verse 10, no, please, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably. So now that he has received him, Jacob is overwhelming with joy and gratitude, and he wants to make this sort of atonement payment. And really, it could be both an atonement payment for what has done and a worshiping payment, like a payment for joyfully being happy that they can now be a family again. So there's an acceptance or a joy to this payment as well. So it's a full offering that he wants Esau to accept as part of their relationship. And so he doesn't want to just let it slide and say, oh, no problem. He just wants to fully make that payment. And then verse 13. So this is another thing that I question. So in verse 13, once they've sort of established a little bit of joy and they're happy to be together now, in verse 13, Esau is asking Jacob to go to seir with him, go to Edom. So he's going a little bit farther south. So he's saying, come with me, we'll go back to my homeland, and we can kind of be together. And Jacob starts making excuses and saying, well, I have a lot of kids with me, and the animals won't move well, transport well, there's babies and all kinds of things like that. And then Esau says, well, let me leave some people with you, and we can all go together then. And then Jacob says, don't do that, or why do that? Let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord. And so it seems like he just sort of wants Esau to go on Esau's way. And then he says that he would go with him. So he says that he will meet him. And then he doesn't. And then he stops and changes on the way. So he, instead of going to and meeting him in Edom, he actually instead goes to Succoth, possibly pronouncing that wrong, Succoth, and he builds a little place there. So he's sort of coming down south from where they met. He's coming down south, and then he's coming over. I'm going to say he's going west. I'm not phenomenal directionally, but I'm going to say when I was looking at the map, then he sort of moves over west and he goes to Shechem, which is much closer to Canaan, which is more in the land of where his father is. So once we get to Shechem, and this I found interesting, he buys land from Hamor, the father of Shechem. So now we're in the town of Shechem, which is the name of the son, Shechem. So again, I'm going to say these cities are sort of built up by the names of these children. They start building land and territory. And then he sets up an altar there. So he buys the plot of land from Hamar, and that plot of land is in Shechem. So now we come down to chapter 34, where Leah's daughter Dinah is she is raped by Shechem. And so uh, I looked up this because I find it interesting that they use the word raped. If we go back to the original, it actually just says to lie with her. So again, I'm in the NIV. And I was curious about this for reasons that we'll find later, because we find that there are a lot of situations where men are lying with women. And as a matter of fact, we found one earlier where it says the sons of God were lying or choosing to lie with the women. And so it seems to be in a lot of areas. Which areas are out of the which areas are not of the women's choosing, and which are? So there's where I feel like that comes against the difference right here. It clearly states that she was raped. Now we're going to find through the story that the sons discuss how she's been defiled. So in the original, it actually says he laid with her and he defiled her. So it wasn't just that he slept with her or that she was a willing partner, but she was defiled by him. He took her unwillingly, and according to their standards, he shouldn't have taken her at all without marrying her. So, and he was a foreigner. He wasn't even of their line. And so you can see up to this point, most of them who were the covenant of God were marrying cousins or nieces or nephews or someone in the family. And so this is completely out of where they should be marrying. And so Shechem took her, and he defiled her and he took her wrongly. And so he still wanted her, though. Like, after he took her and he defiled her, he recognized that he loved her, which is why he took her against her wishes and against the wishes of the family. And so he tried to get her to marry. Um, in verse 10, he said he would offer anything for them to intermarry. Now, we come to a place where the sons lie. They are they're not being honest completely. They manipulate a little bit. So what they do is they start to say, oh, well, if you want to intermarry with us, you need to do the things that we do. So you need to get circumcised. And so they do a little bit of manipulation. And this is all a plan to do exactly what they wind up doing, which is so a little bit of manipulation to get them to get circumcised. And as adults, when they get circumcised, because it was all the grown men of the land that he asked them to get circumcised. And when they do that, they're down for the count. And so these guys come in and they kill every male in that town. So they take their revenge on what Shechem did to Dinah by going in and sort of blasting out that whole town, leaving the women and children, but taking the women and children. So they took the women and children, they took all their stuff, and they killed all of their men. And so I just wonder, actually, this is a complete aside and out of the blue. I wonder if they had killed the men in revenge, but they hadn't taken the money and the women and the children, if anything would have been different. But again, I won't know. I'll never know, because that's what they did, and they should not have done those things. So those things were not really approved by God. And this was Simeon and Levi were the ones that went in and they killed everybody. And so in verse 30, Jacob's really concerned with the way he looks. So Jacob says, again, NIV, Jacob says, you have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. So now Jacob's like, we have to live with these people. And you have embarrassed me by killing everybody. I'm going to change that word, because it's not really embarrassed. The word is bawash, which is the Hebrew word for really abhorred, or it was an abomination. So it was just a little bit more than being obnoxious. I feel like being obnoxious, we've sort of abused that to mean you're annoying. This is more than that. The sons have made them hated people, which I can imagine, since they lied, cheated, and then killed a whole bunch of males in the town. And so I would imagine that people would probably be scared of them, or they would hate them, or maybe they would be after them to kill them. And so we moved on to 35. So because the brothers were upset, like, so he said, you've made us, people are going to come in and they're going to destroy us. And the brothers replied, should we have treated our sister like a prostitute? So it seems like they are doing what is right in the sight of anything. They're punishing the man who defiled their sister. She would be very likely, not 100% certain, but it's really likely that she would not be accepted by anybody or anything. She wouldn't be acceptable to any male after this. No one would want to marry her. She's defiled by their faith, because she's a woman that has been defiled and has no husband, and she was taken out of wedlock. And so, and nothing came of it. It's not like he ever married. So she would be, and of course, that's not even counting the actual trauma that she would have by what happened. And so it would be very tough for her to live. And so I feel that there's possibly some justification in what they did. It doesn't say that according to God, but there's possibly some justification in what they did and an understanding of what they did. But Jacob is concerned that everyone is going to be after them and he's going to attack them. So maybe the brothers could have found a different way to go about this situation. Maybe they could have found a way to we want to solve everything in our own way at our own time, and we lie, cheat, manipulate, steal. We do even if it's just subtly, we do all these things to get our own way, and we feel justified in our own minds. And again, I can look at this and I can say, these were great big brothers, and yet we may or may not find out that this was not according to God's wishes, and we will see how God handles this situation. But what we do know is that Jacob is mad. So they flee, they're running. And in verse 1, it says, God said to Jacob. So here we go again with God is giving them some kind of protection. God says, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So he's reminding Jacob once again that he has shown himself to Jacob. Then in verse 4 says, so they gave Jacob also, so he's packing up his town, or all his people. He's packing, at this point, we remember that he has tons of money, tons of stuff, tons of land. He's got all of these things. He's got all of these sons, 11 children, 11 sons and one daughter at this point. And so he's scooping everything up, and they have to move to a different area. And so in verse 4, it says, they gave Jacob, his people in his house, gave Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them all under the oak of Shechem. Then they set out, and the terror of God fell on the towns all around them, so that no one pursued them. So he protected them. They hid everything. They got rid of all their gods, and God showed protection on them. And then in verse 14, Jacob sets up another stone pillar at the place where God had talked to him. And this time he poured out a drink offering on it. So this is a little bit different than it was before. If you remember before, he set up a pillar where he had that dream. He slept on that rock, set up a pillar, poured oil on it. And then later he makes a deal with Laban, sets up a pillar, pours oil on it, and then sets up several stone pillar. And now here he's setting up another stone pillar where God had talked with him. And he pours a drink offering on it, and he pours oil on it. So now he's adding a little bit of extra. And then he calls the place where God had talked to him Bethel. Now, verse 16 is where Rachel has her second son. And then, unfortunately, she dies. She loses her life while having this son. And then Jacob, she names him something. And then Jacob changes his name to Benjamin. And then in verse 27, Jacob finally comes home to his father Isaac and Mamre in Hebron. And this is where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. This ends our day today. I went a little bit long today. There was a big chunk of scripture in there. It was 32 to 35. So there was a lot of story in there and a lot of things going on. And I feel like we sort of just scratched the surface. So if you have any comments, anything that you want to add while you're reading, I hope you are still reading, even in day 12. I hope you're still in. And if you have taken a break or if you have forgotten, come back and come back to reading again. You could there's never a time where you need to say I quit, I'm done, and now I can't start again until next year. So jump right back in, pick up on day 12, and get to your reading. If this has been a blessing to you, please like, subscribe, and share with as many people as possible. Shoot this out so we have lots of people reading their Bible and enjoying in God's word. Just want to thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow.